Hello friends, in this video we are going to show you how to post Angular form to controller or server side. We already have initial setup ready, we just need to follow below mentioned steps. So the steps we are going to show in this video is we are going to create a form, then we are going to post that form to AngularJS controllers method. Then from that method we are going to pass the data to a service. Basically we are going to create a factory service, and then that service will post that data to MVC controller, and then finally we'll save that in the database. So let's see what initial setup we have. So I have a simple AngularJS application and we have used modular structure to implement that, and we have app.js. Basically we have created a module that is Angular form demo. So Angular form demo is the name of my app. We have specified two dependencies, that is Angular form demo.controllers and ng-route. So when this module is loaded, AngularJS calls these dependencies as well. Now, ng-route is specially specified for facilitating routing. Now we have used route provider to specify the routes. So basically we are supporting only single route, that is a default route. And when this default route is called, the AngularJS renders the addPlayer.html file using addPlayer controller. So currently we have only single page, so that is why we have single default route. As application grows, we can include multiple routes here. Now moving to the dependencies, so we have one dependency that is controller.js. So inside this controller.js we have created that module that is Angular form demo.controllers. Now we have single controller here. Our controller name is addPlayerController, and inside this controller we have set message property on scope, and we have set it to enter your details. Now this message property is shown in addPlayer.html. So you can see we have rendered a header tag saying addPlayer, and message is shown using expressions. So in coming time we are going to create form in this view itself. Now finally we have the main page, the main HTML page, the single page we call, and here we have referred all the required JS files like AngularJS for Angular route for routing, app.js and controller.js, the JS which we have created, and we have connected our body tag to our application that is Angular form demo using ng-app directive, and we have created a placeholder using ng-view directive, and routing will identify the route. It will get the desired or necessary partial and it will render inside this placeholder. So that is how routing in AngularJS is going to work. Now let's see this view in browser, how does it look. So it is going to render that addPlayer.html partial. So you can see addPlayer.html partial. So let's start with the first step. So our first step is to create the form. So I'm going to use the form tag, and I'm going to set its name attribute, and let's set it to addPlayer form. And I'm also going to use one directive here, that is ng submit. So this directive basically on submit of this form will call a function which we are going to create in controller.js. So let's for now say that I have addPlayer function in controller.js where I want to submit this form. Now inside the form I'm going to have a tabular structure, and I will create controls for 3 fields, and the 3 fields are name, club and country. So to enter name I'm going to provide input type text to the user. Okay, and similarly I'm going to have 2 more fields. So the 2 fields are, just a minute, I'm making some correction. So the other 2 fields are club and country. Now I want these fields to be a property on my scope. So in order to do that I have to set ng model directive, and I'm going to use an object structure to specify that. So I'll explain you why I'm going to use that structure. And for this I'm going to have player.club, and similarly for country I'm going to have player.country. Now the reason I have used player and then the property name, because when I want to pass this form to different layers, I'm not going to fetch the individual properties value. I'm just going to use this player object, and all the values will be in that object itself. So that is why I'm using object structure. Now in the final table row, I'm going to have my submit button, and let me add goal span to this, and I'll have input type submit. Okay, now if I refresh my view, it will look like a form, and on submitting, a function will be called, a form will be submitted to controller's function. Now I want to have some validation here, some simple validation, so I'll be using required attribute here. So this will make this control necessary to enter values. So if you refresh this again and if you try to submit, it will say please fill out this field because it is necessary. Now we are going to implement one more validation here. So I'm not going to make this submit button enable unless I enter all the fields. Okay, so by default this button should be disabled, so I'm going to use ng disabled directive, and I'm going to pass a boolean value. So boolean value, we are going to derive it from the form itself. So I'm going to say my form name dot $invalid. So what happens when all the values are provided for these controls, this invalid becomes false, and then ng disabled becomes false, so that that submit button is enabled. If you leave out any of these values, any of these controls, then this invalid becomes true and ng disabled becomes true, and the button is disabled. Now let's go to our view. Now you can see submit is disabled now. If you enter value in all the fields, it becomes enabled. Okay, now our next step is to create this add player function in our controller. So let's go to our controller.js, and this is our desired controller, and here we are going to create our function, and inside this function for now we are going to show an alert saying called. Let's refresh it and check. You can see it has called the alert function. Now the next step is to create the factory. So in order to create the factory, we can use factory constructor. Now the work of the factory is, now factory acts as a repository kind of thing, wherein you just write code to communicate to the server side. So let's create a simple factory. So I'm using factory constructor. Inside this factory, I'm going to name the factory. So basically we are going to name it as player service and comma, then I have to specify the dependency. Now for this factory, I need to have HTTP service being resolved, because I'm going to use these HTTP service to post the data, and then I'm going to pass an anonymous function. So we have only one dependency which we want to be resolved by Angular for this factory, and inside this function I'm going to pass object of HTTP service, and then finally here we are going to create a variable object, you can say, and then we are going to return this variable, and here we are going to create function on this variable. So the first function we are going to create is add player to DB, and we are going to pass an anonymous function here, and then we are going to use the HTTP service object we have passed to this function, to the factory function, and then we are going to call a post function on that, because post is the operation of HTTP, and then we have to specify the URL where you want to post. So currently we have not created our controller and action method, so just for instance we say the controller would be player and my action result function would be add player, and then I have to pass object of player where having all the values, so that we will get from here. So the data will be passed on submit of the form, the data will come to this controller function add player, and then from this add player function we are going to call our service. So when we are going to call that service, we are going to pass a player object that we are going to pass it to the server side, and then on success of this post, we are again going to call a callback function, and then we are going to accept a response. So this will be the response from the server side, and then we are going to show this response in an alert, so that we are confirmed that the post is successful. And alert, we are going to show response dot status. So this status we are going to send it from the server side. Okay, now the factory, our factory with a simple single function is ready. Now we have to call this factory. So in order to inject this factory object in this controller, we have to specify along with our scope. So now AngularJS knows when this controller is getting called, we need to resolve this player service as well. So then we can use this player service object to call our function, that is add player to db, and we have to pass the object, that is player object. So we just have to say scope dot player. That is why I have created an object structure in the add player.html. You can see player.name, player.club. You just have to specify player. All the values will come in that object. Now our client side work is done for the posting thing. Now we have to do at the server side. So let's first confirm this things will be called. Let's move to the server side. So on the server side we need a controller first. So we are going to create a controller. We are going to create empty MVC controller, and we are going to name it as player controller as mentioned in our client.js file. You can see player, add player, and then we are going to name this function as add player, and we are going to return a JSON result from this. And here we are going to return a JSON saying new, and we are going to pass a status, player added successfully. Okay, and now in this function we are going to accept the parameters sent by the client side through a post. So basically, in order to do that, we have to create a model of type player class. So let's create a model. So we are going to create a class with 3 properties, which will be our model, and these properties will have the same name as we have given in add player form, so that the model binding can bind the values to these properties. So let's create the 3 properties. So 3 properties are name, club, and country. So let me quickly create them. So our model is also ready. Now we have to refer this namespace in the controller. Then we are good to go with that model. So we are going to accept the object of type player. Okay, and now let's run and see whether this controller action is getting called and we are getting values in this player object or not. So let's run this application in the debug mode. And our desired HTML pages / angular form app.html, you can see it has rendered. There is some problem. Let's check that. Fab is not defined. Okay, there is something wrong in our JS file, so let's check. Okay, so this is factory, so we have to return the factory here. This is a simple small problem. So let me refresh the view again. Now it's fine. So let me enter the values. Santi, our club is Arsenal, country is Spain, and I'm submitting the form. So you can see action method has been called, debugger has hit. So if you check the values, all the values will be here, and this is done by model binding. And then we will return player added successfully, which will be shown in the alert, player added successfully. Now we are going to save this values in the database. So in order to do that, we are going to use entity frameworks code first approach. So In order to do that, you have to install Entity Framework in your application. So I have Entity Framework being installed in my application. If you want to do so, you can go to Tools, go to Library Package Manager, go to Manage NuGet Packages for Solution. So there you can check whether it is already installed or not. If it is installed, it will show a tick mark, otherwise you have to install it. Once that is done, so you have to add a class, that is context class. So let's add one class. We are going to name it as team context, and inside this, so first I have to refer namespace which we are going to use for Entity Framework, and the namespace is system.data.entity, and then we are going to inherit our context class from db context. And the next part is to create a property of type db set of type our model, and we are going to name this property as players. So what Entity Framework is going to do, it will going to create a database named Angular demo models.team context. Inside that database, it will create a table named players. So in that table, all the data will be saved. Now you must have noticed one more thing. In this player.cs, we don't have any integer property, so we need to have that. It is mandatory. So we are going to name it as player id. So this player id will be an identity property, and that will be inserted by Entity Framework itself. If you don't have this, Entity Framework will throw you an exception. There is no identity or primary key property in the model. So we are good to go now. Now we have to modify a few things in our controller. So I'm going to have a private variable of our context. So I'll say private team context underscore context, and we're going to set it to null. And inside the public constructor, we are going to set this context object, or initialize this context object, and then we are good to use this context object in our entire controller. So now here we are going to say that underscore context dot players dot add, and we'll send the player object. We'll add the player object, and then we are going to call save changes function of context. So now you must be thinking that we have not specified any configuration in the config key, or how it is going to save the data, and we have not created a database also. So let me tell you one thing, that the Entity Framework's code first approach, if you don't specify any connection string, it will create database by its own, and that database you will find in app data. So we will see how that works. So let's for now run this application. So now my desired page is this, and let me enter the details. Club is Arsenal, country is Spain. I'm going to submit my form. So the form comes to the controller. Then I'm going to call add on players property. So this will create database for us by the Entity Framework. If there is any exception or problem, it will throw an exception, otherwise it will go to the next line. So you can see it goes to the next line, so that means database is created for us, and it will show an alert, player added successfully. Now if you go to the solution, if you click on the solution and click on show all files, you will see there is an MDF file. So try to open that file. You will see the database is created by Entity Framework for you. So this is the database, and inside the tables you will find players table, and if you right click that and new query, and using that you can query that table to check how many records are there. So let me write a simple query, select star from players, and if I run this query, it will give me records. You can see there is one record, so let me add one more. So let me refresh this. I say Mesut, my club is Arsenal again, and my country is Germany, and I submit. Okay, and I skip this debugger, and it says peers added successfully. And if I run my query here again, so it will give me 2 records. So you can see there are 2 records. So this is how you can do coding to post your data from AngularJS to MVC controller and finally to the database. So to summarize what we have done, we have created a simple form and then we have posted to the AngularJS controller. From that controller we have called a factory. So factory basically is intermediate between AngularJS controller and the MVC controller, and the factory posts that data to the MVC controller, and then from there the data is saved to the database. So this is how you can work and post your form to the server side in AngularJS. I hope you like this video.